Hi folks, you're with Tassos today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the major or main activist movements and protest movements, if you like, of the 20th century. And I won't be able to cover all of them, but certainly some of the key ones. And let's have a look at what they had in common. So starting with the communist and Marxist protests and uprisings in the early part of the 20th century, say pre 1920. Okay, so now if we sort of look through who are the leaders of these movements, who are the main agitators and stirrers, who are the people who are making the radical pamphlets and distributing them, doing the radical speeches, attempting to instigate uprisings and leading crowds and mobs and placard waving and screaming in the streets. Now, there was a major uprising, the Bolshevik uprising in Russia in 1917, and say following that there was the Spartacist uprising in Germany in 1919, following the end of World War One. And there was the major upheavals in France during the early 1930s, and then if we look at, say, we can move to the Vietnam War and the feminist movement in the late 60s, early 70s, particularly in the United States, and then towards the end of the 20th century, then the radical movements in race and gender relations, and who were the main players and those sorts of games. So let's have a look at that, because it could be coincidence. I mean, it could just be pure coincidence, but there seems to be a common thread here. So let's have a look at it now. Many of the Bolsheviks, including Leon Trotsky or Levi Schreiber, were Jewish, and a lot of the agitators and people who were around the Bolsheviks and trying to agitate for revolution. I'm not sure I'd say mainly Jewish, but Jews being heavily overrepresented amongst these agitators and revolutionaries. Again, Trotsky being the better known, but there were many others. Now, when we go to the 1919 revolution in Germany, the Spartacist uprising, that was led by, again, Jewish people were at the forefront of every aspect of that. A lesbian Jewish school teacher, Rosa Luxemburg, and a professional Jewish agitator, and also sometime parliamentarian, Karl Liebknecht. And they attempted to do an uprising again with many other Jewish people involved. There were also further uprisings in Germany in the early 1920s and even in the mid-1920s, and which sometimes led to major shootouts with police and authorities, where 200 or more people could be shot in the process. Again, mainly Jewish people here. Rarely was it not, and they were very much at the forefront, which is how the Nazis, because the Jews were so prominent in this activity, that it gave the Nazis a free pass to say, hey, these guys are just nothing but troublemakers, and it was an easy. They didn't even have to make anything up. It was an easy story to put out there, because everyone kind of knew it was true. Now, moving on to, say, in the say the 1960s, jumping to the 1960s. I'll go with the feminist movement first, but it's kind of intermingled with the Vietnam War protest. If you look at every single, bar one, I think every single leading feminist agitator in the United States at the time, they were all Jewish. You know, the Eisensteins, Shulamith Firestein, Betty Friedan, you know, Kate Millett, and I mean the list just went on and on. So there were very few that weren't Jewish. There were a few black lesbians thrown in there, but most were Jewish, and many of those were lesbian. And I don't know why they happened. All the literature at the time that was being put out was Jewish writers. And very Marxist, very, very Marxist in their attitudes. You know, Betty Friedan and Shulamith Firestein as examples were dyed-in-the-wool Marxists, and really the writings that they produced were as much a Marxist diatribe as they were an anti-male, anti-family diatribe. So this was very much a Jewish gig. Now, further down the food chain, there were Gentiles, but it was very much a Jewish gig. Now, when we look at the Vietnam War protest, there's Jerry Rubin and the Allen Ginsberg and Hoffman. And, the Bergs and the Steins are just everywhere. And it's tough to find. Now, a lot of these guys came from like the Greenwich Village set in New York in the late 60s, Allen Ginsberg and all that sort of thing. And that they weren't sort of unintelligent. They were bright guys, quite motivated and committed, but they were nearly all Jewish. They're the guys that managed to grab a young and bewildered John Lennon and use him as sort of a propaganda front man for them. Now, again, whether you agree or disagree with the Vietnam War or think it was a good thing to oppose it, why was it that there were so many Jews at the forefront who also coincidentally happened to be serious Marxists and pushing the Marxist bandwagon, and were very much a case that the Vietnam War was a war of Gentiles, and it was the role of the Jewish people to stop the Gentiles from, if you stop the Gentiles from doing A, B, C, and D, then you make the world a better place. And that's very much what Jews are taught in Jewish schools, along with an excellent education that they get. But they're it's very much the message. We're here to make sure the Gentiles don't, behave and make sure they're accountable for their actions. It's kind of, you can see how over the centuries this may not have been received very well. Now we've also got a case or the situations where in the southern United States, the people from the northeast, New York and Boston and around there, New Jersey, were going down to the south of the United States to try and get black people to register to vote. Now, if you look at the people that are going, the activists, the agitators, the stirrers, they were nearly all Jewish. In fact, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who wasn't. Now, some did come later, but that vanguard, they were all Jewish. Now, sort of moving on to if you look at the globalization thing, and you look at the sowing race division and gender division, and that the law should be used as a device to re-engineer society to suit the globalist project. You got all the journalists, the article writers, magazine writers, the movies, the script writers, the producers, directors, people doing TV shows, screenplays, all that sort of thing. They are overwhelmingly Jewish. Now, again, this could all be just a coincidence. Maybe the Jewish people are excellent business people. They can see the money, the billions that the globalists are shoveling into all this propaganda. So they think, hey, why don't we get a piece of that? We've got to put food on the table and pay the rent and so on. So why don't we get a piece of that? It's hardly going to be that because they're ideologically very much aligned with that message, but the globalist message. well, not all, but many are. I did, and I should sort of say, and I've said this before, that I've known many Jews, worked with them, hired them, been hired by them, so I've got no problem with it, by the way. That a Jewish lady I worked with said, well, haven't you ever heard that if there's two Jews, you have three opinions? So it doesn't mean all Jews are on the same side. And let's be clear, you've got people like Ezra Levant, Dave Rubin, um, a number of Mark Levin. The list goes on. There's also Jews on the other side of this pushing back against all this globalization stuff. I like Ezra Levant's work very much, for example. So it's not just a one-sided, uniquely Jewish, but it's an incredible coincidence. There are so many Jews, so many at the forefront. You look at the university lecturers. You look at the lecturers that are most fire and brimstone, condemning white society, hate America and colonialism. If you look at those and how many Jewish academics, Jewish school teachers, presidents of school boards, how many are Jewish? So it's an issue, and I don't know why exactly, other than this disbelief that they've got this mythical fantasy world they live in, that they can make the world a better place, and it's almost like an obligation as part of their education. You have to go out there and make the world a better place. Now, making the world a better place can have many points of view. It can be, fixing the potholes in the road and making sure that gasoline prices don't go through the roof, and making sure that every kid gets to school. There's a whole range of things that can represent making the world a better place. Crushing straight white males, I can't imagine how that would make it onto the list, but it has, and the Jews are very much in the majority in pushing that one. So that's just so looking at this, and what got me on is I was sort of leafing through some old books I had about the Vietnam War, and more particularly the political era. This is a time of like Richard Nixon and that sort of thing. The activism and the amount of street dramas and protests that were going on. Some of them turned very nasty. There were shootings and all sorts of things. So to look at that, and I was staggered at how many Jewish names came up of all the key players, and I'd forgotten about that. I did remember like people like Allen Ginsberg, for example. I did remember those people, but hadn't realised there were so many of them and involved. Now, if you look at the overall Jewish population of the world, they're overrepresented by something like 20 to 30 times amongst the people who are stirring up these revolutions, and that's an incredible overrepresentation. And so it's something that I don't know, we should be afraid of talking about. We should be afraid of why Jewish people in particular are so attracted to revolution, when there's by no means any certainty that the revolution, once let out of the box, won't devour a whole lot of people, them included. And I fancy that's a mistake they've made in the past, and no doubt will continue to make. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.